What happens when the law collides with morality? Judge Samuel Whitmore thought he had seen it all, until a billionaire fraudster Richard Harlow stood in his courtroom. On one side, a man with money, power, and influence. On the other, Maria Lawson, a single mother whose life had been torn apart. The evidence was overwhelming, yet the law had loopholes. Then came the threat. One wrong move and your family pays the price. Suddenly, the judge wasn't just deciding a case, he was facing a moral test that could destroy everything. The verdict shocked the world, but what happened next no one saw coming. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Judge Samuel Whitmore had presided over hundreds of cases in his 20-year career, yet nothing had prepared him for this. The courtroom felt charged, every breath and glance heavy with anticipation. It was as if the very air was aware of the stakes, waiting to see what decision he would make, a decision that could redefine justice itself. The case before him involved Richard Harlow, a billionaire CEO accused of embezzling millions, orchestrating a scheme that had ruined countless lives. Opposing him was Maria Lawson, a single mother who had lost everything, her home, her savings, even her sense of security, because of Harlow's greed. The courtroom seemed divided along invisible lines: wealth versus morality, power versus innocence. Harlow sat with an unsettling calm, his mulatto skin flawless under the harsh courtroom lights. His sharp cheekbones and neatly trimmed beard gave him an air of precision and control. His dark eyes, intelligent and predatory, never left Samuel's gaze, daring him to challenge a man who had built an empire on manipulation. The soft ripple of his tailored suit suggested not just wealth, but untouchable influence. Across the room, Maria clutched her lawyer's arm, her deep brown eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. At just 32, she had aged beyond her years, her long dark hair tied into a tight bun, her frame fragile yet resilient. Every line on her face spoke of hardship, every tremble in her hands echoed the injustice she had suffered. Her story was raw, human, and painfully real, a stark contrast to Harlow's polished, untouchable presence. "Your Honor," the prosecutor's voice rang out, firm and uncompromising. "This is not a matter of law alone. It is a matter of justice. Allowing Richard Harlow to walk free would be a betrayal to every citizen who has ever trusted the system. The evidence is irrefutable, and the victims deserve restitution. They deserve protection from this man's cruelty." Harlow's attorney leaned back, a faint, self-assured smirk tugging at his lips. "Presumption of innocence is the cornerstone of our legal system, Your Honor. No amount of public outrage can alter the law. Bending the rules to satisfy moral outrage undermines justice itself." Samuel rubbed his temples. The arguments echoed in his mind, intertwining with the images of the lives shattered by Harlow's actions. He felt the weight of centuries of law pressing down on him, yet the faces of the victims, their fear, their grief, pulled him toward moral clarity. Outside, a storm had begun, pounding the courthouse windows with relentless force. The thunder rolled like a warning, the lightning illuminating the courtroom in stark flashes. Samuel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I will deliberate," he said finally, his voice steady but laced with the gravity of the moment. As the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, Samuel stayed behind, alone with his thoughts. He knew that when he returned with his verdict, nothing would ever be the same, not for Harlow, not for Maria, and not for him. The moral test had begun and there were no easy answers. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but Judge Samuel Whitmore remained in his chambers, the weight of the case pressing down on him like a physical burden. He sat behind his massive oak desk, reviewing the files again and again, each page a reminder of the impossible decision ahead. Harlow's case wasn't just a question of law, it was a test of morality, of judgment, of his very soul. The evidence was overwhelming, and yet deceptive. Financial statements, contracts, and testimonies painted a clear picture of Harlow's greed and manipulation, but there were loopholes, technicalities that could absolve him legally. Samuel frowned as he traced the numbers, realizing how the law, designed to protect justice, could be twisted to shield a predator. Harlow's influence extended far beyond the courtroom. Emails suggested he had quietly manipulated jurors, and whispers in the legal community hinted at hidden connections with powerful politicians. One misstep, one perceived bias, and Samuel could ruin his career and endanger the lives of those closest to him. Then Samuel stumbled upon a file that made his heart stop. Hidden among the evidence was a record of Maria's past, an overlooked tax discrepancy that technically could have reduced Harlow's penalties if brought to court. The discovery was a trap of morality versus legality. Adhering strictly to the law might favor the man who had destroyed her life. Protecting the innocent might mean bending rules he had sworn to uphold. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The storm outside had grown fiercer, rain lashing the courthouse windows and thunder shaking the walls. It felt symbolic, as if nature itself recognized the chaos unfolding inside his mind. Then his phone buzzed. An anonymous message. Judge Whitmore, be careful. One wrong move and your family will pay the price. Think carefully. Samuel froze. The message was vague but unmistakable. Threats had never frightened him, but this was different. It was personal. The decision was no longer about law or morality alone. It was about protecting those he loved from the consequences of a choice only he could make. Hours passed, the storm raging outside like a mirror of his inner turmoil. He imagined Harlow walking free, using his wealth to crush lives without consequence. He imagined Maria losing everything again because a loophole saved a criminal. Each scenario clawed at him, a relentless battle of conscience and duty. By midnight, Samuel knew something terrifying. No matter what he chose, someone would suffer. Every path was fraught with ruin. The law and morality were no longer aligned, they were on opposite sides of a battlefield, and he was trapped in the center. He closed his eyes, trying to summon clarity. One thought echoed in his mind. Justice is more than law, it is the courage to do what is right even when the world demands otherwise. But as he opened his eyes, the shadows of doubt crept back in. The storm outside was relentless, and so was the choice that awaited him. The courtroom was packed once again, the air thick with tension. Reporters, lawyers, and onlookers whispered among themselves, their anticipation almost unbearable. Samuel Whitmore sat behind the bench, the weight of the case pressing on him as if the walls themselves were closing in. The storm outside had subsided, but a different kind of storm raged inside him. A storm of conscience, law, and morality. Harlow entered with his usual composed demeanor, his dark eyes scanning the crowd as if daring anyone to challenge him. He was the picture of confidence. Tailored suit, meticulously groomed beard, and that unnerving calm that always suggested he was 2 steps ahead. Across the room, Maria Lawson appeared fragile yet unyielding, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes burning with hope and fear. Samuel cleared his throat. The courtroom fell silent. Every gaze turned toward him. After careful deliberation, Samuel began, his voice steady, I have reached a verdict. A collective breath was held. Harlow's smirk was subtle but confident, while Maria's fingers clenched tighter. In the matter of the state versus Richard Harlow, Samuel continued, the court finds the defendant guilty on charges of embezzlement and fraud. However, due to technicalities in the law and the nature of certain contractual agreements, the sentencing will reflect the minimum penalties allowable by statute. Gasps filled the courtroom. Harlow's confident smirk faltered into a barely restrained glare. Maria's eyes filled with tears, relief and frustration mingling on her face. Samuel felt a pang of guilt. He had wanted to protect her, yet the law had constrained his ability to punish Harlow fully. Then came the twist no one expected. Harlow, rising from his seat, slammed a hand on the defense table. This is preposterous. You're ruining lives over technicalities. His voice, usually smooth and controlled, now carried the raw edge of panic and rage. Samuel held his ground, though the courtroom trembled with tension. Suddenly, an aide handed him a file that had been submitted last minute. New evidence proving Harlow had falsified documents and manipulated multiple witnesses. It was undeniable proof of additional crimes. Crimes that could have led to maximum sentencing if submitted earlier. The revelation hit the room like lightning. Harlow's eyes darted, realizing the legal noose was tightening. Maria's lawyer whispered, barely audible, this changes everything. Samuel felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. He had made the judgment he believed balanced law and morality, but the unpredictability of human action had thrown everything into chaos. Media cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and murmurs of outrage and relief filled the courtroom. Harlow was escorted out in a state of simmering fury. Maria collapsed into her lawyer's arms, sobbing but finally feeling a sense of justice. Samuel sat back, exhausted, knowing the moral test wasn't over. He had made a choice, an imperfect choice, but justice in its messy human form had been served. As he left the courtroom, Samuel realized that even with evidence and law, morality was never straightforward. The verdict might have ended the trial, but the consequences of his decision were only beginning. The courtroom had emptied, but its echoes lingered in Judge Samuel Whitmore's mind. Outside, the city had emerged from the storm, washed clean by the rain, yet Samuel felt no relief. The verdict had been delivered, justice had been served in part, but the consequences of his choice were only beginning to unfold. Richard Harlow had been escorted to a detention facility, but his influence was far from neutralized. Reports surfaced almost immediately. Whistleblowers from within his empire were exposing layers of corruption, revealing that Harlow had manipulated banks, politicians, and even court officials to protect himself. Slowly, the man who once seemed untouchable was crumbling under the weight of public exposure. Maria Lawson began to rebuild her life. The settlement, although smaller than she had hoped due to legal technicalities, gave her the means to regain her independence. She opened a small community center to help victims of financial fraud, transforming her personal tragedy into a source of hope for others. Each day she sent Samuel a quiet note of thanks, a gesture that reminded him why he had taken the moral risk in the first place. Yet Samuel's life was far from settled. The media scrutinized his every action, questioning why he hadn't handed Harlow a harsher sentence, why he had balanced law with morality instead of favoring one completely. Colleagues whispered about his judgment, while anonymous threats arrived intermittently, reminding him that Harlow's reach remained formidable. One evening, as Samuel reviewed the final documents of the case in his chambers, a letter slid under his door. The envelope was unmarked, heavy, and ominous. He opened it to find a single sheet of paper. "You may have won this round, Judge Whitmore, but the game is far from over. You've chosen morality over law, and I never forget. R.H." A chill ran down Samuel's spine. Harlow wasn't done, he had promised that much. But Samuel also knew something vital. Moral courage, even imperfect, could inspire justice in ways strict legality never could. His choices had consequences, yes, but they also created ripples of hope and change. Samuel looked out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Justice was messy. Morality was messy. But he had learned that true integrity meant standing firm, even when the path was impossible. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, ready to face whatever came next. The storm had passed, but a new one was already brewing, and Samuel Whitmore would meet it head-on, because in the end, the moral test was never about victory or defeat. It was about courage, conscience, and the will to do what was right no matter the cost.